Okay, thank you, Vince. And again, thank you to all of our presenters in the crop section. I think we can all, whether we're livestock or crops, can really gain some really good information from what everyone has previously presented. So thank you to everyone. So we're going to start our livestock portion. So switching hats and moving right along. So in just being respectful for Richard and his time with us today, we decided to kind of put him back to back. So you might see a little bit of some repetitive information, but it is still good information. We're not going to watch that full video again, but I did put the link to that video in the chat. I think William did more than an excellent job of going through that process and what that is. So you can watch that full video, or I've pulled out some highlights that I'll discuss here shortly. But I do want to play that short video that is so well done and really kind of does like an overview of the project. So I am going to share that.
We're here in town of Bodega. We have 182 acres and we have a organic all Jersey dairy. We milk about 200 cows and we raise all of our young stock here. Our property is on Salmon Creek. We've been here for 40 years and 4 times the creek has gone dry. Water is always an issue, and if there's some way that we can save the water, I think that's a real positive thing to be able to do.
In northern coastal California, where we have winter rains and then a long dry season, and during that long dry season when the water is scarce, the demands are even greater.
We were trying to find ways for people to have all the water they needed without taking it from the creek or from the groundwater. And what was an obvious solution was rainwater harvesting. And so we looked for some of the largest water users in the watershed, and Richard as a dairy was one of them.
His dairy uses 7,000 gallons a day to water the cows as well as to operate his facilities.
So how roof water catchment works is the rain falls on the roof and flows into the gutters. In the gutters it flows into pipes which reach a pond. It's stored in the pond and continues to fill, and then stored and saved until it's needed in the dry summer months.
Using all of the roof space from all of the dairy buildings, we were able to collect 1.4 million gallons. Enough water to offset his 7,000 gallons per day over a 6-month period that he needs to use for dairy operations.
It's amazing how much water these roofs collect. So this is one way in order to capture it, to be able to use it for the animals and for a business, and then also in help the wildlife in the creek there.
Projects like this pond could be very useful for other ag operations because we've just gone through a several-year drought, and this may become the new normal.
Most dairies are short of water, and I think a project like this would really be an asset to them. I really do.
And then next, I just want to share with you some of the highlights of the information that William shared in his presentation. Again, we will share the link for the short video and the long video in a follow-up email with you. So again, this was a presentation by William Hart with Goldbridge RCD, and I do want to say that Brittany Jensen was also part of coordinating all of this. So just kind of an overview, the roof water catchment system, the goal for this was to replace the dry season riparian diversion. So stop diverting water out of that riparian area and collect the roof water. They wanted a reliable and safe source of drinking water, and they wanted to address the low water conditions in the coho salmon rearing habitat. So really looking at a mutually beneficial project for habitat and also for the dairymen, which is Richard in this case. This was a very collaborative project for funding. So Department of Fish and Wildlife was the largest contributor of cost share, but there was also the State Coastal Conservancy, North Coast Resources Partnership, and NRCS EQIP cost share in that. And the total project was about $905,000. This project was meant to capture 1.4 million gallons, which is about 65 cents per gallon of water. Just some additional details. They did estimate about 48 inches of evaporative loss per year. And there were a number of permits that were required, including CEQA and a water board permit, the county grading permit. There was no water rights needed for this, as it is rainwater catchment and not water diversion. And they did need to have prevailing wage compliance because this was a state-funded project. And NRCS engineering review because this was NRCS EQIP fund cost share. And some of the challenges that anyone that would like a system like this is having sufficient roof space, but also sufficient land space to put this pond in. And, you know, everybody says the state moves slowly. This was a 6-year timeline for this project for design, permitting, and implementation. But I really do want to highlight all of the sources of funding and of expertise for this project to move forward. Just because a lot of times we look at one funding source and sometimes it takes the whole village to get the project done. So now let's just move on to Richard Hughes. He's going to answer some additional questions you guys might have. And if you do have any interest in also talking with Goldridge RCD about this project, feel free to contact William or Brittany. Okay, so let's get Richard.
Morning.
Good morning. So nice to see you again. So I have a couple of questions that I pre-prepared for you, and then we have some others from folks in the audience. So first, and I think it's obvious, but I think put it on the table, what was your motivation for installing this catchment system?
Well, I hadn't thought about it before they approached me about this. However, I've always had a feeling about the creek and the fish, and I've often wondered sometimes why there's not as many fish in the creek, and other times there is fingerlings that we can find in the whole habitat of the creeks. So when they approached me with this, I just felt that it was a good way in order to be able to maintain and enhance the environment for the fish that are in the creek, and for the rest of the water sources that are being able to take out of it. Because I did have water rights in order to draw from the creek, so it didn't make much difference. It fit in with my program, what I had in mind.
And what do you see as some of the benefits and then some of the disadvantages of your system?
Well, speaking today, it's a great advantage. It holds, I have a graph here, it holds 1.3, almost 1.4 million gallons of water. And based on the graph, I should have about 6 months worth of supply of water in there. Now, they worked really closely with me and listened to some of the comments that I had as to what I felt needed to be involved in the program. One of them was I felt that it had to have a liner. The second thing was it had to have a cover. The wind blows out here pretty hard. I have a large pond or dam, and it's about 8 acres, and it can drop about 3 feet in a season. And I felt, boy, the evaporation factor is a tremendous when you're trying to maintain what amount of water over a period of time. And so they obliged with me, and we were able to come up with a floating cover that go as the pond drops down, it just lays against the walls of the pond liner, and it just stays there. And then when it fills up, it floats up. So there's no moving parts. They're just little ball, they're almost like a ball, but they do work. They really do work. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, and so, it sounds like you have your system pretty well understood, but would you do anything differently? I think we always have that, I would rather have done this instead, or what would you change, if anything?
Not an awful lot. Originally I had years ago, I had about the gutters, I had metal gutters, and they rusted out. So I decided to use plastic pipe, and I used leach line pipe, and I cut in between the holes and made gutters and bolted them to the fascia, and I did them to put some downspouts. When they did the program, I was using Schedule 40 pipe. They went to Schedule 80. It's pretty heavy stuff. It doesn't flex, though. That's the only problem. It does not flex. So we have a driveway on outside of the barn, and we feed with the feed wagon there, and it's very hazardous in order to run the feed wagon into that plastic pipe, because it breaks very easy. It does. I happened to hit it when we were still working, and I busted off right at the bottom underneath the ground. So it was cold. When it's cold, it breaks easy. When it's warm, well, it moves a little bit. But the nice thing of what they did, though, all the downspouts were come down next to the poles, and then it goes underground, and so all the water off the barns is underground to feed to the tank, to the pond, because the pond is lower, so everything it flows. There's two groups of pipes coming in, one on the north side and one on the south, one on the east side and one on the west side. And they got big pipes, and they had a problem. They didn't know how to do the one big barn. I said, just pop the concrete out and bury it. That's what they did. So it worked out really nice. So anyway.
Someone had a question about what is the lifespan of the cover that you have on your pond?
They're plastic. They didn't give us any lifetime on that there. I don't see whether they would break down. We tried some other ones, then they didn't work very well. They were a lot bigger, and they would kind of sink, and so that left the water exposed to the air. So these, we had to take all the old ones out and put the new ones in there, and the new ones are really working well. They do float pretty good. We've had a few of them. Well, one of the problems that I had, which I hadn't planned on, was we have a lot of wind, and we have a lot of dust and a lot of grass. And the seed blew into the pond. And I ended up having a real nice crop of grass growing on the pond. And I thought, oh my gosh. So this year we made a grappling hook, and we had tied it to a 3/8 inch rope, and we'd throw the hook out there, and we'd grab hold of the grass, and we'd just pull it over the edge and clean it out. So now the pond, it looks just like it did in the very beginning. So we just have to keep up with it now. But because I felt that the grass on there was taking moisture, and therefore I'm going to lose some capacity. So it's been kind of interesting. So I'm gonna use I'm gonna build a mesh pond around there, so the air will flow through, but it'll also stop the grasses and any contaminants going in there.
I always call it dairyman ingenuity, because you guys come out with some of the most creative solutions to some pretty difficult problems. So another question is actually, what is the lifespan and the maintenance of the liner? And do you expect that you'll need to do anything special when you have a dry season where it might be exposed?
Well, the only part of it exposed is the top edge where they buried it. The rest of it down to the water line, but the covers keeps the liner well protected. Those things, they stick way up on. It only exposes about 3 feet from the top, and I've got 2 feet. The pond is 16 feet, and to the top of the ridge is 18 feet. So there's only about 3 or 4 feet of exposed, and it's on the upper side. But they've never given me any comments about the time. But it's designed for 25 years, so I would imagine it would be good for 25 years.
Hopefully more.
Hopefully more, yeah. I spent a lot of time doing it.
So, a lot of folks are, right now the water is an issue, but this was a project that took 6 years to implement. So do you want to comment on what it was like for you to have that kind of a timeline? Was there something that made it go over 6 years, or is that what folks who might install a system similar to this should expect?
Well, the implementation in the very beginning was a lot of behind the scenes stuff that I knew nothing about. It was all in the design of the engineering and what have you. They came out and they did seismic testing on it. They had to do archaeological testing and all that sort of stuff. Those were all things that were behind the scenes that I never really got involved in with. The actual construction of it, I thought it took quite more time than I thought it was going to take. Let me put it that way. There was one day I was really frustrated and I thought, oh shoot, why did I even do this? But looking back on it now, it's good. It's been a really worthwhile. The only problem is when you run a dairy and you've got big equipment and you've got everything going on and they're knocking out your roads to where you're going to run your feed wagon and the tractor and what have you, and you got holes and everything else in order to feed cows. It was pretty testing some days in order to be able to have that. But other than that, I have to admit that the contractor was absolutely very, very much accommodating. He was really, really good. I really enjoyed it, him and his father, and they did a nice job for me. One thing William, there was a lot of stuff behind the scenes that I never even thought about. Where the pond is now, it used to be a catch basin for an overflow for manure. And a small manure pond is only about 6 feet deep. And so when they came in there, they felt that there might be methane gas in the soil. So they put pipes in the bottom of the pit. And then they put the cover over it. So if there was any gases coming from the soil over a period of time, the pipes would expel that out. So it was kind of interesting. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate your time today and answering these questions. I know that you are open to answering questions about this. So if anyone has any additional questions for Richard, please feel free to send them to me and I can direct them to him. And he is a wealth of knowledge, as are William and Brittany with the RCD. So thank you again, Richard, for your time and for your knowledge.
Well, one last thing, can I make one?
Yeah, absolutely.
If anybody wants to come and observe it and see what it is, give me a call and we'll make arrangements.
Yeah, which is a generous offer. So, but it's great to see something if you are interested in that kind of a system. So a generous offer from someone who has a really innovative system. So thank you, Richard.
Thank you.
All right, next we have Jim Jensen, who is going to be speaking on his livestock watering system. So Jim, I will send it over to you.
Great, thanks, Randy. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, and I don't know if you want to share the slides or not.
I can do that.
In a few minutes, whenever. So yeah, I'll just start off with introduction, a little bit smaller scale. Thank you, Cooperative Extension, for hosting this and all the informative resources you guys have been sharing in partnership with NRCS and RCDs and FSA. So a little background, we're in Tamales, have sheep and cattle. Like I said, it's kind of smaller scale compared to Richard and a dairy operation, but still obviously everybody's in drought circumstances. And so my experience that I'll speak to today was kind of a result of the last drought, 2013-14, and also a good reminder that these droughts seem to be more common and frequent. And so, I thought that was a 100-year drought, but we're right back in a similar situation. So 2013-14, on a property that we lease, the image behind me, we have some sheep and cattle, and I decided it was time to try to do a longer term planning water project, and so started working with NRCS. I think Nick will probably speak to, or has already spoken to, the resources or the tools you need to do an NRCS conservation project on leased land, which you actually just need documentation of a lease, I believe, for up to 5 years. I know that can be a barrier, but I really think it is worth it in the long term, not only for your business and your operation, but to help the land, whoever is there in the future. So just something to consider. And so if you'd like to share those slides, Randy, we can start with that. And I signed up with NRCS in 2014 and started going through the planning process, which, as Richard spoke to, it can take a couple years. So encourage folks to get started and really use the expertise of your local NRCS and Resource Conservation District staff. Sometimes they can match grants for, say, engineering, or if you're in a certain watershed, such as the Tomales Bay watershed where we are, sometimes there's other pots of funding that they can leverage or put towards the project. So, take time to knock on all the doors and see what resources are available. So in 2014, we had a spring in the back of this ranch that was slow producing. Here's an image of it, but I knew that it was the only water source in the back of this ranch, and if we could add storage and then the technology that we have nowadays that our ancestors didn't have in the past, as a solar pump, by adding storage and being able to move that to a different part of the ranch, we could really improve grazing distribution, be able to rotationally graze, and just give you more flexibility in a drought scenario where you can buy some time to make some decisions and have a little bit more storage. So that's what we did. It was a system that I worked with NRCS staff and their engineering folks there to make sure we had enough capacity and the spring could at least support the most capacity that it could produce. On a lot of these ranches in West Marin and Sonoma County, there are springs that were historically used, and sometimes they've been abandoned. People have kind of given up on them for different reasons. They just have relied on the dam and kind of forgotten about the springs, but I think there's a lot of opportunity to capture spring water and make sure that you protect those springs, and that they are, when you do improve them, you take care to protect them, but they can augment things like ponds, dams, or other water sources that you have, and maybe they give you a little bit of cushion to take some pressure off of your pond or dam or a well that you're relying on. So there's some great designs and engineering plans, but you have to be considerate of what type of soil you're in. Out here, at least where we're at, some come directly out of sandstone, and so they have to be captured, or historically were captured differently, and then some are just seeps that come up out of the ground or wet spots. And I do notice that they move around. So from year to year, one is producing and seasonally a lot of water, and then that changes. I don't know if it's because we have an earthquake or just the water year where the water is. So it is definitely case by case. There's no one size fits all on a spring scenario, because it has to work for your operation and also to maintain that spring in terms of the habitat it provides and the vegetation it supports. So just an example here, it's hard to see, but in the bottom right, there was a spring that was developed a long time ago. It was just a culvert, essentially vertically inserted into the ground with some leach rock around a spring, and then all put back in place, and a pipe ran out to a single trough. And it's commonly what we see is springs were historically just run to a trough, and then overflow was just went back into the ground. And there was not a lot of effort to insert tanks or solar pumps, because previous generations probably didn't have that. But now with that technology, there's opportunities to capture overflow, still support, a trough near the spring, but then pump water to a different location. And so that's what we did here. And so you can go to the next slide. And so there was a spring and a trough again up in the bottom of this small swale. And we took the overflow from that and also included a diversion valve and went to a tank and then installed a solar pump. And I did this with a contractor after we had NRCS designs and engineering. And then I helped to kind of keep the costs down, worked with the contractor to do some of the basic tasks, and then kind of required the contractor to do the more complex connections and make sure everything was up to the specifications. And so you can go to the next slide. So when we're finished, pretty straightforward. This is a tank pad, and actually the pump is in this tank, and it's pumping up to another tank at a higher elevation. Pretty standard, just protections of your plumbing. I think you actually want to insulate them or potentially paint them to reduce UV damage. And then, by doing this, we're really trying to take livestock pressure away from the natural spring and move it to different parts of the ranch. So you don't have all those animals when they really get thirsty, all coming and compacting and impacting your spring area. You want them, you'd ideally like to pump that water somewhere else, and then that distributes your manure and nutrients elsewhere on the ranch. Next slide. So this was the pump system. It was pretty elaborate. I think John had a similar example of Grundfos SQ Flex, I think, system. There's so many more solar companies, and this technology is rapidly improving, and I think becoming more affordable from just when I did this in 2015 or 16. But just a small solar array, and so in some cases you can mount all this hardware just on one pole, and you don't need a fenced enclosure like we created here. But as I said, this technology, wasn't around in the old days and is rapidly improving. And so this system has been pretty trouble-free. It has had a few maintenance issues, keeping the panel clean, making sure the wiring is, doesn't get water in it, and the system's protected from livestock damaging it. But so this pumps water about, I think it pumps at about 700 feet and probably about a 200-foot elevation gain, maybe 300 feet. So moving water from an area of the ranch that has a spring, and even if that spring is only producing 300 to 400 gallons a day, it's not just running away, it's storing. So if you have to move animals and then your tank gets low, you can give it a break and then move them back. You can go to the next slide. And then, so this is over on a different part of the ranch where that water goes to 3 different water troughs. NRCS does have specifications, so they do want to see the troughs protected and ramps and a good gravel pad. I always encourage putting more rock around it because when the animals all congregate, they will wear that away. And then this just gives you more flexibility to insert, say, cross fences or electric fences to rotate your grazing or manage livestock. That helps you kind of adapt in the drought. I think that's probably it on the slides, just an example. And so a few things I would add is just, natural springs are not the fix-all solutions if you have wells and ponds, but I think it's just another tool in the toolbox that you can capture water, and things that we didn't have in the past, like solar pumps, is now you can move that water to additional storage. And so when the animals, like they always do, tend to all come to the trough at the same time, if it's just a trickle going in there from a spring, they're going to start to break stuff and be standing around waiting for water. Whereas if you have that storage and on the float system, the livestock can get their water and go on about their ways. Also seen several of these systems installed and had ranchers, mention that their cattle gained more weight and were healthier just from having access to clean, fresh water all the times, even in different parts of the year in the springtime and times when they're not in drought. I don't know if there's a picture in there or not, but I would suggest putting the float balls on the tank so you can see what level it's at. So you can check these with binoculars, say from a distance, then you know if there's an issue. But they do take maintenance like any water system. These springs often have to be blown out with either air or water. So I think there's 8 or 9 spring systems, and I'm probably checking them at least every 2 weeks. They do require, just keeping an eye on, and a lot of them will work great, and certain ones will slow down and others will pick up. But I definitely think it's something to consider or look at if you're managing land, and working with NRCS on a process. Again, it's not quick, but it will help you prepare for the next drought. And I think that's about it. It's just another example of kind of being proactive instead of reactive for the long term. Folks have questions.
Perfect. We did get a couple questions. So first, someone was interested to know what contractor you worked with for this project.
Sure, and I think the resource conservation districts might have lists of contractors. In West Marin, I could even probably put together a list of folks and share that. I wasn't sure if we share that here. I think on this one, I partnered with NorCal Pump Works. There's also Furlong Construction. There is, there's kind of a long list of contractors out in this area that have done work on springs that have experience. And so I think the RCD might have a list of contractors. Those are folks that I used with for these projects.
Okay. Also, how many troughs can your system feed to in terms of how many, in case people are interested in more rotational grazing with additional troughs, and then also how many animals?
Sure. So this system was a spring that was producing anywhere from, as low as 300 gallons a day, but maybe up to 500 gallons a day on, that's a 24-hour cycle. It's pretty slow producing, just a trickle, but that went into 10,000 gallons of storage. That went to 3 separate cement troughs. So technically you could divide that into a lot of different pastures using those permanent water troughs. But just a reminder, when you work with NRCS, they actually, create these contracts, and the reimbursement rates is per gallon, say, on your trough or on your tank. So if you already have a contractor there installing a 5,000 gallon tank, you might decide to just go ahead and add a second tank since they're already there. So things to consider. I probably would have added 2 more tanks to this just to add, and numbers, this supports up to say 300 sheep grazing with 20 to 30 cattle. Those numbers may fluctuate, but it can support that. But you can do the math right there. You can figure out how many gallons per day that's going to require. And then say we get, we have weather like now, we're having some cool foggy weather. Sometimes that reduces consumption and your spring can kind of catch up. And then when you have those heat waves, you have storage and you can keep an eye on things and then just adapt. But there may be times where you need to move animals out and let that spring catch up.
Right. Also, someone's interested, is there a suggested resource for concrete troughs to purchase locally?
Sure, and this is a tough one. People usually have sources that seem to come out of the valley better. I could also send a list of concrete trough sources. Typically, Friedman's will get a truckload when they have an order for them. They won't always store them on hand, but they will order a truckload when they have enough demand. And then there's several sources that make concrete troughs in, I think one in Modesto and one up maybe in Willows. And sometimes it almost makes sense. I think in the last drought, through the land trust and the RCD, we may have actually bought a truckload because there were so many projects that were backed up waiting for them. So it's something to potentially consider. If somebody's going over there or backhauling, getting some cement troughs.
Perfect. Well, I think that's the last of our questions. But if you have those resources available for contractors and things, that would be great. And then we can share those out with these recordings and things. So appreciate that. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. Happy to follow up with those.
Thank you. Our next presenter is going to be Nick Goodman with NRCS, and he is going to talk about the new EQIP CIC program that they are offering and looking more at the livestock aspect of that.
Great. Thanks, Randy, and thanks, Jim. Yeah, so my presentation is going to kind of just tie into what Jim was saying a little bit, since his work was done through our EQIP program, and I'm going to talk about our EQIP CIC, which is our Conservation Incentives Contracts. So this is a brand new program, and forgive me if you were on the webinar earlier, this is going to be a lot of overlap, but gotta go through it anyway. So yeah, California is one of 4 states, Western states, that are in this kind of trial for the CIC program. California has received $22 million to assist for agriculture producers, including tribes who are interested we're mainly focusing on drought resiliency conditions over the long term. So this is a 5-year contract. So Jim was saying about land control a little bit. So you will need to either have a deed or a 5-year lease to be eligible for this. So our EQIP normally is 3-year contract, but this one is 5, so that you can kind of meet your immediate drought concerns and then build off that for more longer term. Another little difference, if you're familiar with EQIP, to this program is you will have to include an enhancement. So not just a practice that we do in our normal EQIP, but an enhancement that we do through our conservation stewardship. So that's kind of just one step above. So you could even do an example of an enhancement for this would be prescribed grazing. You could do the practice, and then you would have to go above and beyond and include like soil testing or fecal samples. There's some other ones, like if you do more intensive rotational grazing, that could work too with increasing your stocking rate or more cross fencing. So one thing for this EQIP CIC program, it's a separate pot of money than our EQIP Classic. So if you've already reached that limitation of the $450,000 in the Farm Bill, you can get this $200,000 still. So you're still eligible for this CIC program. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about basically practices that we can do on more grazing land. So a lot of what Jim talked about is what we can do. So a livestock water system is the main thing, right? So we can pay for tanks, troughs, pumps, the pipeline. I saw it looked like Jim used PVC, but you can also do HDPE if you're interested in that. Tanks as well, we can kind of switch it up a little bit. As far as water storage, one of our requirements is it has to have at least 3 days of water storage for your amount of animals. So it'll depend on how many animals you plan to have out there. But we tend to do the 3 days of storage. And let's say you want to do 10,000 gallons of storage. You wouldn't necessarily have to do a 10,000 gallon tank. You could do 2 5,000 gallon tanks and even move them around in different areas. Some other things we can do is cross fencing. Unfortunately, the NRCS, we can't fund perimeter fence, but if you want to break up your pastures or fields a little bit, we can help fund that. We can do range and pasture planting. So if you want to seed an area, it does have to be rested afterwards. You can't have your animals in there right away. We can help with herbaceous weed control. So that can be mowing, or if you're not organic, any kind of spraying, we can help with that. Brush management is a big one. Certain parts of the county have a lot of gorse, so we can help pay for removal of gorse or Himalayan blackberries, other woody species. And then prescribed grazing is what I mentioned earlier. So that's kind of keeping track of your cattle, when you move them, how many cattle you have in there, just making sure that you're not overgrazing an area. And hopefully the grazing plan will help you manage your fields a little better. So if you'd like to apply for this program, here are the steps. So first off, you would contact our office. The next slide will have my contact information. We can set up a site visit. We'll bring out the application, or we can send it in advance. So for this CIC program, you'd have to apply by July 12th. And for people that have already applied for EQIP, this is a separate one. So you will have to apply again, and you'll have to write CIC on your actual application, and make sure you do that by July 12th. And then after that, we'll come out, we'll do that site visit, we'll develop a conservation plan. Your plan will be ranked against other plans, and if it ranks high enough, you could be selected for funding, and then it could be signed into contract. Once the contract is signed in, we have to do a biological and cultural resources review. So this is where Jim said that, you know, we're slow, right? Like the government's not quick, and the reason that is because of these biological and cultural resources reviews. Anytime the government spends money, they have to do these reviews, and they can take quite a while. So we typically tell people a year out. So we could be planning now, and then this time next year, or even maybe a little earlier, you can be installing the practices. And with it being a 5-year contract too, you can do some of the practices the first year and then spread it out and keep building on top of your plan. But we do have to include one enhancement in there as well. So once that review is completed, then you can begin your work, and we give you these implementation requirements. So for the livestock water systems, for example, we have engineers that'll help design that, and they'll give you specific implementation requirements on what all needs to be done. So one thing is our troughs, we require wildlife escape ramps in it. So basically a ramp that goes down to the bottom. So if a bird or something gets in there, it can climb back out. Once you have everything installed and completed, we'll come out and inspect it to certify it. And then you are paid on your certified practices, and it's direct deposited to you. One thing I would like to add on this too, Jim was saying that he helped do the work to keep costs down. So we don't mind if you do the work yourself, or if you have a contractor. We have a flat payment rate. So let's say, like, just for example, a fence, let's say we estimate it to be, we pay $3 a foot or something like that. So whether you have a contractor come out and they charge you $5 a foot, or you do it yourself and just have the materials, we'll still pay you $3 a foot no matter what. And with that, here's my contact information. Drew is my supervisor, and there's his contact information. You can just call our office line. It's that 1242 extension 3, or the Farm Service Agencies, our sister agency. You can contact them, their extension 2. And with that, I can take any questions that we may have.
Perfect. Thank you, Nick. We do have 2 quick questions. One is, will spring development project funding be available through either this EQIP CIC or EQIP at some point?
Yeah, good question. Yes, it is available through this. We typically like to do more like a redevelopment. So if it's been developed in the past, then you can do it. Another thing I forgot to mention that this question jogged my memory is we can also help pay for if you're drilling a well. The thing with that though is you have to hit water. So let's say you go out and you drill a well and you don't hit any water, we can't help pay for it because it's not addressing our resource concerns. So there's a little bit of risk on your part if you're drilling a well and trying to have us help pay for it.
Perfect. All right, I think we're going to move on, but thank you so much, Nick, for your time now and for your time earlier. And I do know that they will be at an FSA meeting tomorrow, and so we will give the details for that, so you can also see them tomorrow. So I am going to give the next presentation, and I'm going to try to be quick. So I'm going to talk about dairy facility improvements that we can do to help more with water efficiency. And I'm really going to highlight one particular project that was done in collaboration with a number of different partners. This was at Bivalve Dairy, and we worked with Marin RCD, UCCE, NRCS, MALT, and CDFA, their AMP program. And Bivalve Dairy was using 10,000 gallons of fresh water to flush their freestall dairy barn. So this on the left is their freestall dairy barn. And this was flushed down so the manure would flush out of the barn to give it really a very clean and hygienic environment down into their manure pit. And so that was a lot of water that we could use in other ways. And of course, I do believe that on dairies, we are really great recyclers of water. So I'm not saying that flush systems are bad and we shouldn't use them, but fresh water we can really utilize in other ways, particularly if we have the ability to convert those systems over to a scrape system. So Bivalve Dairy applied to get automatic scrapers, and the automatic scrapers that they have chosen are actually, we like to call them the Roombas of the cow barn, but it is a Lely robot vacuum that goes through the barn. It's this image here on the right, and actually suctions up that manure and goes to a pipe and then deposits that down into the next stage of the system. So by doing this, the dairy was able to stop using 10,000 gallons a day and reutilize that in a way that will help their dairy in a different way. They also have done solid separation with this project. So they have chosen to use, this is called a Dairy Tech Bedding Master. And so what that is it has a screw press separator, which is the image in the middle. And that brings that manure that the robot has sucked up, it pushes it through, and the solids are separated out from the liquid. The solids then go into an in-vessel composter, and that actually dries that. It doesn't fully compost, but within 24 hours, it is nearly fully composted. And then they can actually use that material as bedding. But I think the water efficiency key here is that we're pulling those solids out. And so what's going into the manure pond is actually a very irrigationable liquid. So we can actually use that to fertigate without bringing our ponds through more of a settling stage type system. So we're able to use that to irrigate and potentially get some more days on pasture, or use that to irrigate other areas of the farm for feed. So there were a lot of funding partners. Malt helped fund this project. The Marin RCD helped fund this project. There was NRCS cost share funds as well. And then we applied to the CDFA Alternative Manure Management Program. And unfortunately, due to COVID and redistribution of funds, this program was not funded for this round of funding, but it is hopefully going to be refunded in 2022. This is a program that is open to livestock sectors, and the main goal of this is to reduce methane emissions. We do have 6 projects that have been funded locally within Sonoma and Marin County. So it is an accessible pot of money for our local producers. You can get up to $750,000 without any cost share, although using other funds like EQIP and MALT and our local RCDs are a really great way to become more competitive in this program and really any of these CDFA programs. So I highly encourage that if you're interested in these types of programs to really work with all your sources so that you can be as competitive as possible. If you're interested in a program like this, again, it's not immediately funded, but I am a person who can offer you technical assistance for this. I also wanted to briefly say that unfortunately our Sonoma RCD folks were not able to join us, but I just wanted to tell you that they do also have some services that they are able to provide. And that includes technical assistance for improved water use efficiency and conservation. They can do a phone call or a field visit, and this is no cost to the producer. Also, vineyard block irrigation evaluations and distribution uniformity testing. There is a 15% landowner cost share, and there's also limited availability for this. So if you're interested, please get in contact with them. And they can also calculate rainwater catchment volume potential and sizing for the systems. And they really put an emphasis on this for the rangeland operations. If you just need simple calculations, there is no cost to you as a producer. But if you need more detailed calculations, there is a 15% landowner cost share. I will put their contact information in the chat. And if you guys are interested in any of their assistance, please reach out to them. And with that, I will take any questions if anyone does have any. I am not seeing any. Perfect. So with that, that keeps us on time, and that is going to lead us to our next presentation, which is Dr. Stephanie Larson, and she is going to talk to us about grazing and how we can be more resilient with grazing.
Okay, hi everybody. It's been a lot of great information so far, so I'm excited about that. I want to just kind of concentrate on a few things. Hang on one sec, and I will get this going. Some of the things that I've heard, and I think some of the things that are important for us to kind of think about when we talk about getting prepared for drought. And is that working, Randy? Or is that just in the?
So yes, we see your slide deck.
Yeah, I can't figure out how to get it into the. Nope.
So I think if you hit that from beginning.
There we go. Sorry.
Okay, no worries.
Okay, so I want to talk about drought and fire and how to prepare for the next disaster. And unfortunately, there will be more disasters. It just depends on what it is, the disaster of the day, if you will. But kind of taking some of the things that people were talking about from a funding standpoint and the grazing opportunities, I just want to highlight a couple of them. Match.graze, which you can go get on that website by matchgraze.com. And what that purpose is to put your profile on there if you're a grazer. So you're a cattle, a sheep, a goat, all the above grazers, go in there and you put your profile saying, I'm looking for land, I provide this service, I will rent your property. And then hopefully we're going to be increasing more land owners to go to that site, driving them to that site to look for folks to do grazing. And you might want to start thinking about what is going to be your marketing niche. How are you going to make that yourself more appealing to folks to pick you to come and graze? There's different aspects of that, whether you're just a small scale and a community grazer, or you are a targeted grazer and you are paid for a service. There's several of those that are happening around the county, or that you're a traditional grazer that is willing to have a lease with that landowner. And then that opens up some opportunities for some of the funding sources that were discussed earlier. So go on match.graze, fill that out, do your profile, and then start looking for more opportunities for you to find land. And then the next thing is the prescribed grazing. And we've heard NRCS was just talking about prescribed grazing as a practice. And what that is, and I don't want anybody to be concerned about it or, I'm here to demystify it. It's just grazing, but putting a plan together that makes sense for you and your operation. And I can work with you on that. There's several other people that can help you write a grazing plan. They usually want them written by a certified rangeland manager. And so what it is we just do an assessment of your property. We look at your soils, we figure out your carrying capacity, and then we look at how you are grazing. If you have a variety of different fields, how you might rotate those animals around, how you might start implementing some of the practices that were just mentioned from NRCS. I might want some more water sources. Having that plan gets you in the door. And that's one of the practices that NRCS will pay for. And it's one of the practices that gives you extra points when applying for other funding opportunities. So think about having a grazing plan. And many of you have a variety of different plans out there, from way back when water quality plans to your current EQIP plans. Grazing could be another way to get more funding opportunities, but also to help you to better address some of these disaster issues, like how can I better manage my vegetation and help me get through maybe a drought, or if I had a fire, and kind of that whole idea of resting and rotating my pasture. and how I might benefit from that. Might increase my carrying capacity. I might get more animals. I might market it differently. So again, think about match graze and then prescribed grazing. So we talked about this a month ago or so when we were doing drought, and it's this whole idea. And if you probably haven't already done it, I'm sure you've destocked. You've looked at how can I reduce my numbers. How can I feed through a drought, which really doesn't ever pencil, but maybe you have some certain stock that you want to keep. And then let me just suggest you select 1 or 2 pastures that you might call your sacrifice pastures. So how do you choose those? Choose those that maybe have the best opportunity to be enhanced in the fall. So maybe they're flatter pastures, they're bigger pastures. If you're near a public area, maybe it's a pasture that is not so close to the public, so maybe they won't see it. It's going to become very barren because you're going to leave your animals there because maybe you want to try to save some other pastures around. Maybe they're too steep, the slope's too much, you don't want to have any problems with erosion. So choose the flattest pasture, maybe your best soil pasture, because in the fall you can come back and reseed that pasture. And that might be part of your grazing plan, might be part of your equip plan, is that you're going to reseed or maybe add compost to that pasture in the fall. And so go ahead and sacrifice it, feed on those pastures now, and plan to remedy it in the fall. Or it might be a pasture that you've got some real weed infestations. Maybe you've got a lot of Medusa head in there, then go ahead and stomp it. Go ahead and trash it, and because you're going to come back and reseed and try to crowd out those unwanted species. So think about where I might put that sacrifice pasture for and put my animals there this summer. And that's where I'm going to feed out on. So then other grazing opportunities is that you want to be prepared for the disaster. So again, thinking about and working with UC Cooperative Extension or RCDs or NRCS is making a disaster preparedness plan. So that helps you with a grazing plan, it helps you with other plans. So define your goals and list your practices to achieve them. So maybe you don't have time to apply for some of these grants right now, but the money's going to be coming. It's still going to be there. So think about, okay, going forward, I'd really like to, enhance this pasture area based on the soil type. I'd like to grow some different vegetation. So it's important. Start to know your soils, know your vegetation types, your landscape attributes. What's the slope? What's the aspect? Where might I have water? Start to develop that plan, whether it's a disaster preparedness, whether it's evacuation plan. Have a plan and be ready for those funding opportunities when they happen. For example, have your leases, have them updated. You've heard numerous times today, you have to have a lease. And a lot of you have handshake leases, or you have leases that you signed 20 years ago. They need to be updated. So here's your opportunity to do that right now. So let's focus on the drought and maybe a little fire, because that's probably going to come, drought and fire. So we've heard about those funding opportunities. So NRCS just talked about their July 12th grant cycle. So if you don't feel you can get ready for that one July 12th, because that's right around the corner, you could start being prepared. Get your leases together, get your plan together. If you want to do prescribed grazing, let's start talking about that. FSA's got a program tomorrow, so learn more about what they're going to be doing and those opportunities. RCDs, that's been mentioned. Now, the county has a PG&E grants program. They just finished one. This is going to be, there'll be more cycles on that. So think about, okay, I need to work maybe in a bigger community, in a nonprofit, and think about how I might apply grazing or some kind of other practice to reduce fire potential and then help my grazing, help my resiliency on my property. And again, there'll be more fire funded programs. So again, having that plan, thinking it through, maybe that it also includes prescribed fire. It might include some tree management, maybe some shaded fuel breaks, some brush control. So again, start looking at get an aerial map, look at your parcels, think about where I might want to do some practices. We also have online at our wildfire fuel mapper site is that you can download that information for Sonoma County anyway. And that would, if you have 3 acres or more, I would encourage you to get those maps, and that helps start to prioritize your programs and your practices that you want to implement. So think about all of those opportunities, get prepared, and then let's kind of think about our soils and why that's important, because we really want to increase our soil organic matter. And because of drought, that's really going to impact our soil temperature. There's no vegetation on there. The sun beats right on that soil. It's going to increase the temperature. And from that, it's going to really start to cook the soil microbes that are in there. And those are the ones that help the water function and that whole process of photosynthesis and osmosis. So again, trying to maintain that cover. And that's why I'm thinking just sacrifice one pasture, not the entire pastures. So think about how I might increase my soil fertility because the drought is going to decrease it. Think about how I might reseed because, again, we're going to have decreased forage production because of the drought, and we're going to see a change in species. We're going to see more of those tap-rooted species, more of those thistles, because they can go down further with that taproot and get water, whereas the grasses have more of the fibrous root systems, and they're going to be a little short on the water. So drought is very detrimental to the soils. So how can we address that? Okay, how can we improve that? So we can think about coming in this fall and replanting some perennial species. We can think about applying compost. We can plant some woody species or different species that have different rooting systems. So you might plant some fibrous roots, some tap roots. You might plant some various shrubs here and there. And again, back to that prescribed grazing. You can do all of those practices, and now is the time to start thinking about it. Why is that? Well, there's the Healthy Soils program that's going to be rolled out probably in August-ish. September, we haven't quite heard yet, but now is the time to get prepared. So what is the Healthy Soils program? Well, it can assist in helping you to address things like climate mitigation, improve soil health, and increase your resiliency to these disasters. It's long-term planning. So it can increase, the soil carbon in your soils by maybe applying compost. Maybe you're going to use that as your marketing. You talk about how you're a carbon farmer in your marketing plan. It's going to increase the water holding capacity and the infiltration. So thinking forward, we may not get as much rain as we used to get. It might be changing because of mitigation. So the point being is we want to capture as much water as possible, capture all the water that falls from the sky, and it doesn't run off. It goes through the soil and we capture that. So again, that's another reason we want to kind of look at having deeper roots and healthier soil microbes, again, because that helps keep our plants growing. And we want to maximize water capture. So by doing so, we can move to a more perennial system. We're going to have a longer green/growing season. So that's what's really important. And that's why we want to think about the Healthy Soils program. And that is going to do all of those things that I just mentioned. And like I said, it's going to roll out. So start thinking about is where on your property you'd like to plant some pastures. You might want to apply some compost. You might want to plant some woody species. So those are the practices that it will help you with. And so now's the time to start looking. Now's the time to get your leases together. Now's the time to start contacting either the UC Cooperative Extension, the NRCS, the RCDs. We're all there to help you to apply. And what I found last year was whoever got their application in first was funded. If you got everything in there. So we want to make sure that everybody can get in there very quickly and get their application in. So again, let's get started. Again, if you need help applying or you're interested in, here's the email that tells you more about the program and additional resources there on CDFA's website. So with that, now it's time to prepare for disasters, for funding opportunities, and additional grazing plans. And with that, Randy, I'll take if there's any questions.
All right, Stephanie, I do have a question. What are some plant species that you recommend planting, or what are some resources for determining what those varieties to plant might be?
Okay, so again, depending on who's eating the grass, depending on what your goals are, I would, and depending on your soil type and the amount of precipitation that you're going to get. So thinking about if you're out on the coast, versus that you're in, eastern Sonoma County. You might plant different species. So ideally, we want to have some perennial species and perhaps some annual species, because the annual species come up first, and that gives you something to graze early. And then as you do your prescribed grazing, then the perennial species will come in later, say February, March, April. So it really depends. LaBallesters is a really great resource because that company's been around for a long time, and they're very familiar with what species grow here well. And we've done a lot of research over the years to see what species do grow well. So for example, people like to plant orchard grass, and orchard grass is great, but it won't grow in areas it's drier. So orchard grass would be super on the coast, whereas you might use more of a perennial rye on the east side. Depends on where you're at. But we're looking at a whole bunch of different plantains and radishes for that taproot. So again, it's a lot of species that people have tried, and it's good for the grazing animal, and it's good for the soil.
Okay, another question. NRCS requires resting after planting. How would that work? Do you need to not graze on newly planted pasture, or how long before you can graze?
Okay, great question. So again, it's going to depend obviously on rainfall. So say you plant in the fall, and I would say that you would wait until you see about 4 inches in height, because I'm thinking there's about that much down below. But again, it's going to depend on what you planted. So you don't want to go in there too early, because if the soil's wet, the animals are going to muck it up. And so you want to wait until the roots are established, so that when the animal comes and takes a bite, it doesn't pull it up the whole plant by the roots. Rule of thumb, maybe 4 inches. Again, that's just kind of depending on the timing. And I'm not sure exactly how long NRCS wants it rested, but I think the purpose being is they want to make sure that that plant has established a root system that can withstand grazing.
Perfect. That was our last question. We did get a request for your contact info, but I do believe that Vince put that into the chat for you.
Perfect. And if anybody was interested in writing a grazing plan, I can definitely send an example, and they're your plans. So it can be very detailed, or it can be pretty straightforward. This is what I want to do, and these are the pastures I want to do it in.
Correct.
Yeah.
And Stephanie and our Climate Smart Ag team are also good resources for the Healthy Soils program as well. So thank you, Stephanie.
Yep.
Okay, our next and our last presenter is Jessica McIsaac. Let's spotlight you here. And Jessica's going to be talking about her water storage system. And you want me to share those slides for you, correct, Jessica?
Yes, please.
Perfect. I will do that. All right, Jessica, it's all yours.
All right, good afternoon. I just wanted to start by giving you a little bit of overview about myself and our ranching experience and what we do here. And so my husband and myself, along with his father, have a dairy farm in the Tamales, West Petaluma area. We love our ranch, but historically it is a drier ranch without any deep wells. And we depend on a dam or a reservoir to water our cattle, our dairy cattle, all year long. That's 100% how our cattle are watered. And we milk 350 cows. And so cows and supporting young stock, it's about 700 head. And I'm just telling you this because we're going to get into some volumes and storage. That's the focus of this. So I just wanted to give you a ballpark, because knowing your needs is really where you need to start. So that's what we do is we milk cows. And historically, as I said, our ranch is a drier ranch. So what that means to us is every 4 to 5 years, our dam, our reservoir gets to the point where we don't have enough water. And so we have to haul our water to our cattle. So that might be 2-3 months. It happens, it might start in the summer, roll into the fall. It just depends on when the rain comes. But what happened last year was we dried up in August 3rd, we shut off our dam and started hauling water. And then, of course, as you guys know, it didn't rain hardly at all. And so we never turned our dam on, and we have hauled every day since August 3rd. So we're coming almost on a year. So what that means when I say us, that's not me, that's 100% my husband. We do all the work ourselves and don't rely on any outside labor for that. And so I guess we can move on to the first slide, and I'll get into some more details about the hauling and our experience with that. But I'm going to start with funding. So our system really developed in 2016 with that drought. So we had some infrastructure, we had a truck, and we had some tanks, hauling tanks, but we didn't have an entire setup until 2016. And since then, what I did was I utilized the FSA program, the ECP program in 2016, and that really allowed us to ramp up our infrastructure, and it really allows a sense of calm in this really crazy time, and allows us to run our business day to day because we prepared ourselves back then with the infrastructure we needed. So what happened in 2016 was we were in a drought and we were hauling. And at that time, the FSA office put out a program, the ECP program. And so I took advantage of that program in every sense that I could. And what we did was we put in 4 additional, maybe we can switch up to that. There we go. We put into 4,000-gallon plastic storage tanks. And those tanks were paid for by the ECP program. You can see that the tanks are sitting on a cement pad. That's also paid for. And usually those government programs require some of this stuff. So that's a requirement when putting in these tanks, I believe, is that they're sitting on a pad. The piping that goes between there was paid for by the program as well. What you don't see in this picture is, I would say, 30, 40 feet. In the other direction of these tanks is a cement tank. And that was our original tank in the 1976 drought. My father-in-law had this cement structure that was going to be a manure storage area right outside our milk barn. But that drought, he took the chance to say, hey, I need to have storage capacity. So he built that third wall closing in the cement tank. So we have a 10,000-gallon cement tank from 1976 drought. And then we added 16,000 gallons in the 2016 drought, with all of the tanks, pipes, and cement pad being paid for by the ECP program. You can see that we have pumps there, and it's an electric pump, and that's paid for by us. And then like the electrical paneling, that's all additional things that are paid for by us. So Randy has another slide that'll show our truck. And so I want to encourage people, same thing Stephanie was talking about. And I'm a farmer, so I understand there's a lot of things to think ahead and be prepared about, but you have to have a plan how you're going to water your cattle, because we know it's the #1 requirement for all livestock. And so you have to have a plan of how you're going to get your water, where it's going to come from, how you're going to get it to your property, and how you're going to store it, and then how you're going to disperse of it. So it's a really complicated process. I'm thankful that we have a lot of equipment and we have done it in phases. I feel like we have a very good system. And I talk with a lot of other neighbors and friends who have been put in this situation this year on how to develop the system. So as you can see right here, this is a 6,700 gallon tube. So I count that in our quantity of storage. The tube pulls up and you can see the tanks just behind it. And these are some connectors. Like, people call us and don't even know where to get connectors to hook up to these sort of pipes and hoses. And so these are all parts we can pick up around Petaluma at places like Maselli's or Bearings and Hydraulics are the only sorts of places that carry these big valves that allow the equipment to all hook up. And so when you're preparing a system, it's really important to consider your capacity, like your needs is before capacity. How many head of livestock do I have, and how much water? And I think most people don't really know how much water they use unless they already have a meter in place. And so that's the first place, which is why I shared our numbers. The first place to think about how much water do I need? And then you can get into building a program. Currently, the ECP program that I took advantage of is not open, but we're hoping that it will open back up. As we know, the drought is being seen far and wide. It has to be voted on in Washington for them to allocate funds to open the ECP program back up. So we're hoping that it opens back up, and I encourage everybody to start, get tanks, even if they sit empty until you need them. It's an important part of running a business when this is what we're seeing. If you have a ranch that is a drier ranch. One more slide, Randy, and I can talk about sort of putting the whole plan together is some things to consider. So how much water do I need to water my livestock? And when considering that, you need to consider how you're going to bring the water to your property. And what I mean by that is we have the advantage of bringing the water to our property every day when we need it. But unless you own your own semi trucks, that's not so handy to everybody, meaning you're going to be relying on a company maybe to bring your water to you. And in that case, you need to over calculate or over plan the capacity, the storage capacity that you have. For instance, we have a slide here, if you use, let's just say for 4,000, one tank, 4,000 gallons in a day. Well, if you only have one tank for one day's water, you have to be completely out of water before the company can bring you the next load of water. And that's saying that they have the availability to even get there when you need them. Nobody should ever run out of water for their livestock. There's too many variables at hand. And so I encourage you to have 2 to 3 days worth of capacity on site when you're, especially if you're able to utilize a program to get some infrastructure. Make sure you do the calculations right and you have enough capacity. So how much do I need? And then how much capacity do I need? The next thing you need to think about that I mentioned earlier is like how you're going to get the water to your property. So somebody like myself, we have invested in like water hauling trucks and tanks. Other neighbors in the area I see have a manure truck that they've cleaned up and that they are getting water in. I see people with large tanks bringing water to their property. So you need to think about, how am I going to get that water? I know for a fact that it's not feasible, to rely on a company to bring you, like a potable water hauling company to bring you as much water as I need. And so you really have to put some thought into that. But where is that water going to come from? So if you rely on a company, you don't really have to think about that. They might have the source. But again, at a time like this, even if you did rely on a third party to bring you your water, the majority of the water sources at this time are shutting off water to filling into a dam, So that means you have to have some above ground storage to be able to haul into, or you're not even like an option for the third party to haul. For example, the city of Petaluma is not allowing any of their water to go into a pond. So where's that water going to come from? Some people might have another ranch that has more water and they can bring it from one ranch to another, not pay for the water, just pay for the labor. For us, we, with our experience over the years, we would rent a hydrant from the city of Petaluma. And in 2016, when we saw things get really bad like they are now, and not just bad in terms of water quantity, but in terms of, pointing the finger, and there's a lot of pressure about getting water from a city hydrant. So there's a lot that goes into that morally. And when that all started taking place in 2016, our family decided to pay the rent on the hydrant every day, even when it's raining year round, and ensure that we have a hydrant and a place to get water anytime we need to. So we have a home since 2016, but for 4 years, we kept paying for that assurance that we knew we would have a place to get it when we do. And we're one of the fortunate ranches that have a hydrant. There's only 3 or 4 that actually have their own meter and the ability. So finding the source is a really big challenge. And then the disbursement of the water once it arrives at your property. So some things to consider is I hear a lot of people, I guess it's more on storage. I hear a lot of people that have no plan with their water and they think they're just going to dump it into their pond. And we have actually been on some other webinars, my husband and I, where we hear lots of people just say to do that. We highly advise against it because you have to consider the evaporation. I mean, we're not scientists, but it's common sense. You're going to evaporate. You're only able to haul so much water a day. You're probably not able to haul much more than your livestock is able to consume in a day. And so the amount that you're losing to mud and evaporation really isn't worth the expense. You need to put the whole plan together. So the final piece of that plan is the disbursement of the water. For us, we have a system. That cement tank that I described is the center of the system. And we're able to pump out of that to all the locations, all the water troughs and barns that we need to. And if your farm is running off of wells and just filling directly to water troughs and pipelines, and you don't necessarily have a central location, if you get into a situation like this where you have to bring your water in, how are you going to be able to disperse of that water? So the disbursement is a key part of considering the entire system. So 4 things: the quantity of water you need, the way you're going to get your water, or the source of your water, the storage of your water, and then the disbursement of your water are the main aspects, I think, to putting together a good water storage system. And the next slide is really some things to consider. Like I said, I recommend planning larger and planning smaller, but almost everybody I talk to, because we all know it's expense, and those tanks are very expensive, but they're also hard to get. So if you can get them, I recommend people get them and plan a larger system than you need, because again, water is the #1 nutrient for all livestock. My husband would tell you he would recommend larger pipes for faster unloading. This is because he goes to work at 11:30 at night, works all night to then do all his day work. So when he can save 15 minutes in between trips, when he can unload that 6,700 gallon tank faster, that's an important aspect for him. Another thing is, when we started, we didn't have that electricity and that pump in place. We only had a portable, probably $500 pump that we can move from place to place, like something you can pick up and move. And we kind of have 3 places that we'll unload. We have a potable water if we need some time, and then we have 1 tank that feeds 1 location. So we have 3 locations that we might unload water, and we would move that around. With the amount of water we're hauling now, we've installed pumps at every location because it saves time and makes the job faster. And like I said, all of that time is really important when this becomes, you know, your survival. And the other thing is we installed electrical pumps. That station that was shown is right next to our houses, and our water is hauled all during the night. And so when we had that portable gas pump, it was really loud. And so when we were putting some more thought and work into our system this last year, we put in electric pumps for quieter, faster unloading. And then I want to say, think creatively with the FSA. If the program opens up, the program money is there at FSA for the use of water storage. And I believe, I don't know exactly all the details of what it covers, but things like the storage, the pad, the pipes, and think about, even if you aren't utilizing it now, if you think that your property is going to be in the position to need it, you should think about looking into an FSA program to see how it can benefit your ranch to become more prepared for the future. So with that, that's a description of the system that we have in place, and I will take any questions.
Thank you so much, Jessica. We did get a couple questions. First, someone's interested in your experience with the below ground concrete tank. So do you find them stable? Do they crack? Do you think they're a better choice than the poly tank? So what is your experience with the in-ground cement tank?
Okay, well, just a cement tank in general, I'll tell you that we have 3 on our property. That one is below ground, but we have 2 above ground. So I have, you know, a different understanding for that tank. That tank is our main system year-round. So how it works on a non-drought situation is that our reservoir we're a very hilly ranch. There's no flat spot on it. So our reservoir naturally is sort of bermed in on a hillside at a higher elevation. And so it flows to that cement tank, and then it's dispersed from there. So that tank is very reliable for us. Cement's very expensive now. I know a lot about cement too. Cement is very expensive. It's $190 a yard now. So neither of them are easy. I think maybe calculate out your options and your availability. Not only is cement expensive, but finding contractors and people to do the work right now are expensive. Unless you are going to build it into a hill, you're going to need, you know, an excavator, the cement company, all of that. The contractors, it's not easy to get those kind of people if this is something you're needing to use this year. So in that situation, it might be easier to go to Friedman's or a place. There's a tank depot on Santa Rosa Avenue. My husband knows where to get all of this equipment. And so going to one of those places might be the best option. Both are very reliable. Of course, when making your cement tank, you would reinforce it, make your walls the correct thickness. The other 2 tanks I have that are cement that I have experience with is that our potable water comes from 2 springs, and then it feeds into these 2 tanks. They are more above ground. They're mostly exposed. And so in that case, I can tell you I have 1 tank that gets a crack, and we seal it up with like a cement sealant. It just grows some moss. It's not a huge dripping leak. It's just a crack with some moisture. So the 3 tanks we have are all very reliable. We're not losing water from any of them. Again, do the math on the numbers, 6 to 8 inches, probably 8 inches at least cement walls I'm no engineer, but do put the numbers down and see which is going to be the most financially stable for you. It also might be a situation where having a below ground tank is a lot better for your property for whatever reason, and that cement tank might be a really good option for you.
And the next question, because I know you guys did the in-ground in 76, so a while ago. So maybe Karen might also have some insight, but do you know what permitting went into getting that tank put in? Or maybe Karen
I
can,
don't.
or Vince can speak to that. Maybe not. Okay, well, another question is, where did you get those 3 pumps that you have to pump the water into the tanks?
Yeah, so we utilize Tim McCloskey Electric in Petaluma, which is more of a dairy ranch electrical kind of company, and they do all of that for us. Again, very busy. All these tradesmen are so busy these days, but if you call them and told them I need to do a water project, the McIsaacs, he would know exactly the water pumps you need. But also, hard to find the people that work on the ranches, but having those like ranch type contractors, you can say, hey, I need to move this much water this fast, and they'll know what you need because they're used to working with this kind of equipment. But Tim McCloskey is who we work with. We buy the equipment from him and he installs it all for us, along with all of the tanks and pumps that have to do with our cement tank is the disbursement center. So there's submersible pumps and other tanks that go along with that. And he maintains all of that for us.
Perfect. All right, well, that's our last question. Thank you so much, Jessica, for joining us. And if anyone in the audience does have any additional questions, feel free to send them to me and I can send them along to Jessica. But again, thank you so much, Jessica,
no problem,
for joining us today. Also, thank you to Stephanie and Nick, Jim, and then of course, Richard earlier and William Hart. I appreciate everyone's time. We do have a couple other questions that people ask. So, you know, depending on who is still in the on our panel here, we will answer those. So feel free to stay on if you would like. But I will answer or ask some of those questions. So feel free to leave if you need to, but I will go through and ask some of those questions because I think we do still have some of those folks in the room with us. So first, I do want to address, there was one question about Richard's project, about how he had a pond, but someone was wondering if a tank was an option for rainwater catchment. And I do want to say, yes, it absolutely is. You know, you can drain those gutters and things into a tank, and we do have some folks that utilize gutters into above ground poly tanks for that, or even the bladder. So that is an option. Jessica, did you have something to add?
I was just going to add that it's a really, I'm sorry, Richard, I didn't hear your presentation, but a really important part of gathering water is so much water on the roofs. So we do a lot of that. And then you put a little tank next to the roof. Either we have one cement one and we're looking into putting in some poly ones this year, and they pump to maybe a reservoir or something. I would look at NRCS Equip program. Really is good at guttering and roof catchment. So maybe look at that program as well, not in the FSA, but across the aisle at NRCS.
Yeah, good suggestion. Okay, next we have some questions for Nick, if you are available. We have 2 questions for you. We'll see if you're around. Oh,
yeah, I'm here.
Okay, so the first question for you was, are there any options for funding to expand ponds for more capacity. So not a new ponds, but pond expansion. Is there funding options for that?
So as far as I'm aware, not through us, because our ponds, like I said earlier, have to address wildlife concerns. So it's pretty tricky. So short answer would be no.
Okay. So then another question for you is, someone has over 10,000 range laying hens, which use pasture. So would they qualify to apply for that CIC program within EQIP?
Most likely, yes. So we do have to meet resource concerns, and it depends on what they are interested in doing. Like if it's any kind of like water, livestock water we were talking about, you could definitely do that. But even like a grazing plan for the chickens, or some kind of herbaceous weed control to, I guess, improve plant condition, that would all be eligible.
Perfect. We did have a question for Jim, but I do believe that he had to leave. So I think that was our last question, unless Vince or Karen had anything additional to add about cement tank permitting.
Not much detail, except to say what I did in the chat, which is that most agricultural grading in Marin County is exempted from permit. Once you start putting up a structure, even a tank like that, you might need a building permit just in order to demonstrate to the county that there isn't a risk of failure of that wall. Like Jessica mentioned, there's some engineering that goes into that. Definitely something that I can help folks with. If that seems like a good option for your operation, just contact me and we'll start to figure out what the right path is for that.
Yeah, and in Sonoma County, you would definitely need permits. So it's way different, apparently.
Okay. Well, that is the end of that. I do want to remind particularly all of our farmers and ranchers in the room about the FSA program that they're having tomorrow at the Sonoma County Farm Bureau. I think, Karen, if you have that information, it is important to call. Even if they can't get you an appointment tomorrow to get everything filled out, it's still worthwhile to go there, meet with them. Nick and Drew from NRCS will be there, and you can get that process started, because this is really important funding for folks for that FLP and ELAP program. It is from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. And again, just go ahead and give them a call, because even if they can't get you in immediately tomorrow, you can maybe get a reservation or a spot on a different date. So do be sure to do that. I do also, again, want to thank all of our presenters, and thank you everyone who joined us today. I think we got a lot of really great information, and I appreciate everybody's time for being here. And then also, we did record all of this, so we will share the recordings. We will share some resources that we mentioned throughout the webinar as well. So look to both your email and also our websites for that information, because we will have that available as soon as we are able. Any final words, Vince or Karen?
Just reiterate how grateful we are to all the speakers and partners who joined us today. And thank you, Randi, for taking us through the second half of the day.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us.